Check. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So another question, which is very interesting to ask, is okay, so what's going to happen in the future? You know, what are the effects on humanity? And the truth is that is a little bit harder to estimate because while the link between greenhouse gases and climate change is very well understood, it's difficult to predict how much greenhouse gases we are going to actually release into the atmosphere over the next century. So what they've done, the leading scientists have decided to just take several different models which estimate different patterns of growth. So one is the kind of business as usual model, which they have named E2, which basically means slow economic growth, high population growth, and a slow shift to green technology. So basically it's just doing more of what we're doing already. And what they are measuring is under this scenario, given the best climate models we have, what is the likely temperature going to be in the 2090s compared to the 1980s? So over this 110-year span, how much will things warm? And in this worst-case scenario, it would likely be 6.1 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a lot. I mean, that's the difference between a 75-degree, pleasantly warm summer day and a hot 81-degree summer day. The other thing is that these trends are not uniform over the whole world. So some areas are going to be less. Some areas are actually going to be a lot more warm, more than 6.1 degree figure there. Also, if you go to the other extreme and say, okay, what's the best case? So we'd say we have a lot of economic growth, we curb population growth, and there's a big shift to new technology. So in this scenario, they're saying the most likely warming is 3.2 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically, we have enough wiggle room to, we could reduce the effects of this by half if we really take action now in a bold way. And then another thing, the last thing, is even if we were to cut temperature or the emissions to zero today, then the warming would continue to go on for about 1.1 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is to illustrate this concept of, we've already put a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and actually it's kind of like, you have a big train. Once you try to put on the brakes, it takes sometimes a mile or two before the train can come to a stop. So basically, we've gotten a lot of momentum going here, and even once we shut off the switch, it's not going to, the effects are going to continue beyond that. So we need to really be proactive in reducing carbon emissions before we get to the point where it's really having the negative effects. So what does this really mean, really, in terms of quality of life? In a nutshell, we've talked about, okay, there's slightly warmer summers, that's inconvenient, but the real meat of the impact is increased heat waves, droughts in some areas, flooding in other areas, and also rising sea level, which can damage coastal cities and reduce water quality. And the other thing about this, which is really the tragedy of the situation, is that there's an unequal distribution to which areas are going to be affected in what ways. And a lot of the areas that are already most impoverished and have the most problems with world hunger are actually the areas that will be hit worst by climate change. So let's talk a little bit about these points one at a time. So just starting off with severe weather, the IPCC found it to be very likely that both heat waves and heavy rains are going to increase. And also hurricanes and typhoons are likely to become more frequent. And then in terms of the actual distribution of rain, basically, let's take a look at this graph on the next page. So this is a map of the world, and this is actually one of the more progressive climate change scenarios where we've actually done a lot to mitigate the effects of or to reduce carbon emissions. So this is an estimate of the percent change in rainfall over different areas of the world. So you can see that some areas like Northern Africa, South Africa, the Western United States, Southern Europe, Middle East, are going to get less rain. In fact, quite possibly a lot less rain. And areas like some areas of Africa, India, Southeast Asia, areas of China, are going to get a lot more rain, which could cause flooding. In some cases, the amount of rain change could be even up to 40%. If you look at Morocco and the Middle East, a lot of those areas are in the 20 to 40% range. Even in California, here where we are, the change could be about between 10 10 to 20%. So, there's already a lot of concern about water issues in California for irrigation and that kind of thing. That would be greatly exacerbated by climate change. So, looking at that graph, seeing the amount of reduction in rainfall in Africa is pretty concerning. And so, what are the impacts of this? Well, the IPCC says that agricultural production, including access to food, in many African countries is projected to be severely compromised. So this is really, and it is not even far in the future. I mean, this is by 2020, millions of people, 75 to 250 million people, experiencing increased stress in terms of getting water for irrigation and crops and that kind of thing. So really, just the impact of in terms of human life is pretty huge here. In other areas of the world, as I was saying, there would be increased rains, which would lead to flooding. And basically, there are a lot of areas, especially in Southeast Asia and in Africa, where there are very large cities that are built on these mega deltas, where these large rivers flow into the ocean, very low elevation, and also, again, close to the rivers, the water that's coming down from there. And as a combination of both increased rainfall, up to 20 or 30% in some areas, as well as rising sea level from global warming, then it's likely that 20% of the world's population live in areas that are likely to experience increased flooding. And I mean, just to get a little bit of an idea, in third world countries, in developing countries, it's diarrheal diseases, which are often caused by parasites in the water supply, which is very heavily correlated with just having clean water. Those are the number 4 leading cause of death. So if you reduce water quality, if you have flooding, if you have extra rain and water coming up from rising sea level, the impact on the ability to have clean water and be healthy would be quite large. So just to finish this up, one myth that some people have that I wanted to get rid of just as we're doing this is, so we have the economy is bad, we have a recession now, and maybe we can just wait until later, and then we'll get ourselves out of the recession and then invest in new technology. And the truth is, the IPCC has found that the next 2 decades are the deciding factor in how hot the world is going to get before it stabilizes. And basically, the reason for that is as we develop, as many countries around the world develop and also replace existing infrastructure, they have a choice to make. Do they do that with green technology, or do they do that with the old high-carbon technology? And the effects of that choice is going to last for decades to come, the entire life of the power plants or the infrastructure that you build. So now really is the time. And the other thing is that actually green technology is going to be a sector which will open up around the world in terms of a market, which the U.S. can become a key player in. So if we actually invest in this now, it could help us in terms of stimulating the economy and creating jobs. So that's what I have to say about global warming. And I hope that everyone leaves here with a sense of urgency, but also a sense of power and empowerment, which again is what some of the other speakers are going to focus on in terms of individual action, because individuals can actually make a huge difference in terms of fighting climate change around the world. So thank you for your time, and I hope you've learned something today, and I'll be around for questions afterwards. We're going to have our next speaker, Knauft, come up and give the next talk.